Mr. President, it's not unusual in this job of ours in the United States Senate to run into a reporter in the hallway. Happens all the time. They're trying to write a story and they want to ask a question or two to get a quote possibly for their story. Today I came out of one of our hearing rooms and on the Committee on Agriculture, and one of the more prominent reporters for one of the cable news networks said to me, "Can you give me a reaction to the suggestion by President Trump yesterday that somehow or another the United States of America is going to take over control of the Gaza Strip and develop it?" Well, I'd read that in the morning papers, was aware of that assertion, and all I could say to him was, if you follow his suggestions that Canada become the 51st state, that we take over the Panama Canal, if necessary by force, that somehow or another we come into ownership of Greenland, the notion of developing hotels on the ocean in the Gaza Strip is just one of the Trump suggestions we're dealing with. For those who argue, well, the American people voted for him, were they voting for those things? The point I'm trying to make has been made earlier by Senator Schumer. There are efforts afoot that go way beyond the issues of this last presidential campaign, where the American people, I believe, said, we want to change. We're going to vote a majority for Donald Trump because we want to see a better lifestyle for ourselves and our kids. Those things make sense to me. And I'll tell you, in my life, as I reflect on things that have happened to me, there were times when the government played a very important role in my life. I recall when my father passed away when I was in high school, there was a Social Security disability assistance check that helped me to go to college. And then, of course, there was something called the National Defense Education Act, where I could borrow money from this federal government that had to be paid back, but I could borrow the money to pay for my school expenses. Had the government not been there in those two instances, I'm not sure if I could have completed college or where I'd be today. I didn't start off with a litmus test of whether I love government or don't. I needed a helping hand, and there was a program created by this government, by this Senate, that came to my rescue. What we're discussing now is the nomination of Russell Vought. I don't know the man personally, but I've read plenty of what his philosophy consists of. And I believe he's being offered one of the most powerful jobs that most Americans don't even know, the Office of Management and Budgeting. One of the essential powers of the Senate under our Constitution is advice and consent, which means the Founding Fathers said a president can pick his team, but the Senate has to approve that team, advise and consent when it comes to that person. The constitutional authority gives the Senate the power to review and approve presidential nominations, and with it, the responsibility to ask hard questions. Well, that's been the case in the last several weeks, as the nominees for the president's cabinet have all come forward to be reviewed by members of the Senate. Our nation's founders viewed this as a check on the power of the president, ensuring that the country's most important leadership posts are filled by truly trustworthy, qualified, law-abiding Americans. I take that responsibility seriously. I probably, as I reflected on running for the Senate, did not reflect on how many times I would be called to judge a person as part of my job. But as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, ranking member at this point, I have had to review the resumes and interview literally hundreds, sometimes thousands of applicants for lifetime positions with the federal government. When I reflect on it, it's an awesome responsibility. But you have to project as to what that person will do once they have the power of office, and that's what we're doing today. I joined with my colleagues in opposing the nomination of Russell Vought to be the director of the Office of Management and Budgeting. He's been nominated by President Trump to run this agency. It's the largest office within the executive branch of the government. Its job is to oversee federal agencies and administer the federal budget. Now, most of the time when we're called on to evaluate nominations, we do our best to take a look and review the nominee's qualifications and experience. We meet with the candidate, and I've done that today several times with several nominees, and ask them questions to determine their fitness for the role. Sometimes you can tell this is the first time they've ever really seriously considered serving in government in their lives. Well, we try to imagine what they'll do with that power, but for Mr. Vought, there's no need for imagination. He already has served as director of OMB during the last half of President Trump's first term in office, and I believe he proved who he was in that period of time. When he served as director of Office of Management and Budgeting during President Trump's first term, Mr. Vought illegally refused to release hundreds of millions of dollars in security assistance to Ukraine and delayed $20 billion in disaster aid for Puerto Rico. If that sounds like a lot of power, it is. There was literally a question as to whether Ukraine would survive the invasion of Vladimir Putin. Our government had committed to helping. Mr. Vought decided in his capacity as head of OMB to withhold the funds, and there was a serious question as to whether Ukraine, fighting for its life, would survive. And $20 billion in disaster aid for Puerto Rico after the hurricanes that struck and did such great damage to that nation, it was a life and death proposition. And he decided that he would withhold these funds. When he left that role, Mr. Vought went on to become a key architect of what's been referred to many, many times as Project 2025, a policy proposal written by a conservative think tank outlining a sweeping, extreme vision of America's future. Project 2025 included policies to consolidate power in the executive branch and to undermine critical services the federal government provides to American families. If that sounds familiar, perhaps you're following the president's ongoing attempts to freeze federal funds legally appropriated by Congress. That is no coincidence. Mr. Vought is the MAGA puppet master in this administration. And 2 weeks ago, we saw it at its worst. I see that Senator Murray of Washington is on the floor. She is our Democratic leader when it comes to appropriations. I serve on that committee and respect her judgment. I'm sure she remembers, as I do, when the word came out that there was a pronouncement from OMB that they were going to put a freeze on federal spending. It didn't sound real. Think that they'd stop spending across the board? They made a few exceptions, but to stop spending in so many areas, and then the phone started ringing. From the state of Illinois, they started calling Senator Duckworth's office and my own office and telling people exactly what was involved. Programs like Head Start. Head Start is a critical program that began in the 1960s. It's for kids pre-kindergarten to spend a day under supervision and a learning experience and a socialization experience that can make all the difference in their lives. For their parents, it's a great opportunity. Last Friday, I visited one of these Head Start facilities in the city of Chicago. It's known as El Valor. It's remarkable. Seeing those kids and the experiences they're going through is heartwarming. These kids are from working families, and they're not from families that have a lot of wealth, but they have an opportunity in Head Start to have a good, clean, positive classroom experience that prepares them for school and prepares them for life. One of the parents wanted to make a point of coming in and telling his story. He talked about what a transformation took place in his little boy when he became part of this Head Start program. I have such a positive feeling about that because I can't think of a better investment of my tax dollars and anybody's tax dollars than in making sure those kids, that next generation, has a fighting chance, and Head Start gives them that chance. Well, when OMB announced the freeze, one of the first agencies that felt it were the Head Start programs. They started realizing they couldn't keep their doors open because they don't have a lot of money to turn to if they didn't get the regular infusion of federal funds that had been guaranteed to them over the years. Some of them actually thought maybe we could last a day or two without that federal fund, but most of them realized they couldn't last at all without it. So why in the world would OMB turn to a program like Head Start and say that's where we want to freeze federal spending? For goodness sakes, I'll be the first to admit there's waste in our government, there's waste in corporations, there's waste in many directions. But to start with kids, struggling kids from working families, and to say we're going to cut off their program, that's your first priority for cuts? Meals on Wheels. What is Meals on Wheels? Well, it's something most people with an elderly parent or grandparent know full well. It's that one time each day when someone knocks on the door and brings literally a hot meal to someone who's living alone usually, and has to depend on that not just for food, but for socialization and that friendly smile once a day that they just dream of and live for. And to cut that program along with Head Start, come on. But that's what I learned. I learned that this freeze from OMB that started the Trump administration involved Meals on Wheels. But it isn't just these programs that touch my heart, and I hope touch yours. We had calls from medical researchers from hospitals across the city of Chicago, and I'm proud of those hospitals. We have some of the best in the world. And they do key research, critical research, cancer, heart disease, and so many other things. And they work with the National Institutes of Health, the premier medical research agency in the world. Well, it turns out that when the OMB of President Trump wanted to start turning out the lights, they decided to do it on medical research as well. What were they thinking? If you've ever been in a terrible moment in your life where someone you love is seriously ill and you're wondering if they can survive, one of the first things you're going to ask that doctor, is there a medicine? Is there a process? Is there a surgery? Is there some breakthrough that maybe can save the lives of somebody I love? That's one of the first questions you ask when you face that awful moment. So what did this OMB decide to do under President Trump? They decided to cut off funding for medical research. These researchers literally said, we're told at 5 o'clock to go home. That means walking away from an experiment, which I've been working on for a long time, and losing all the progress that I've made. Really? That's your priority? I don't think the American people thought that was what they were voting for when they voted for Donald Trump in this last election. Mr. Vought has made his beliefs perfectly clear. He believes that the president can refuse to spend money that Congress has appropriated for the American people, despite this being in direct violation of the law. The law is known as the Impoundment Control Act. Some have naively claimed that Project 2025 is nothing but a thought experiment. It is clear that since President took office, it has been a blueprint for a radical rewrite of the principle of the balance of power in our Constitution. And it's no surprise that as a key author of Project 2025, Mr. Vought continues to lead that charge. Knowing this as we do, placing him in charge of OMB would be irresponsible. You saw what they did initially with the freeze just a few weeks ago, and it would entirely undermine the role of the Senate Appropriations Committee and the United States Senate itself. What I find disappointing, discouraging, is that so many of my Republican friends who work so hard to be elected to this chamber are willing to give away our constitutional rights and our constitutional authority. This idea of impoundment gives away the power of Congress to appropriate. This latest attempt to put a sweeping freeze on federal funds is far from the first time Mr. Vought has broken the law and undermined Congress's power of the purse that is set forth in the Constitution. It is clear from Mr. Vaught's comments and actions that he has contempt for Congress as a co-equal branch of government. It is appalling that so many of my Republican Senate friends voted to advance his nomination as he actively attempts to strip Congress of our congressional authority. We're not opposing Mr. Vought solely because he poses a threat to our ability to do our jobs in Congress. Mr. Vought has made it clear that he's targeting working families across the country. Both in his previous tenure as OMB director and in policy proposals, Mr. Vought has proposed budget cuts that slash the social safety net for the resources for tax cuts for the wealthy. It is being reported today that representatives of Elon Musk, so-called Department of Government Efficiency, are now inside the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, where they've gained access to key payment and contracting systems. I know Elon Musk. I've met him on 2 or 3 occasions, one-on-one. We've had conversations. I respect him in many respects for his achievements with his car as well as with SpaceX and solar energy projects. He's done some remarkable things, making him the wealthiest person in the world. Having said that, I don't believe he has any qualification to sit here in judgment of our government and its future. He's been given an outsized role in the Trump administration, though he has no authority from the American people. He hasn't been elected to a damn thing, but he's apparently won over the heart of the president, and he's making decisions which affect people's lives every day. These representatives of the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, which isn't even a department, are looking at the system's technology in Medicare and Medicaid, as well as spending that flows through them. That means every hospital, every senior in a nursing home, every child with a serious health condition are at the mercy of Elon Musk's minions considered to be where they're considered to be worthwhile spending. The director of OMB should manage funds that serve everyday Americans, not billionaires. Moreover, Mr. Vought clearly intends to politicize the federal workforce. While serving as OMB director during President Trump's first term, he was the architect of, quote, Schedule F, a plan which would allow the president to fire nonpartisan civil servants and replace them with partisan loyalists. On January 20th, President Trump signed an executive order reviving Schedule F, another move right out of Mr. Vought's Project 2025 playbook, effectively stripping thousands of career civil servants of job protection. Mr. Vought has called civil servants, quote, villains, close quote, and he's advocated for their mass termination. But more than 70% of the federal workforce serves in national security roles. His plan, Vought's plan, would jeopardize American security. To my Republican colleagues, for the sake of an institution in which we work, the constituents we were elected to serve, and the constitutional foundations of our nation, please don't vote for Mr. Vought. Maya Angelou once said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Well, from his tenure running OMB to his authority of authorship of Project 2025, Mr. Vought has shown us exactly who he is and what he believes. He is a man with little respect for the Constitution and limited understanding of the plight of real working Americans. Giving Mr. Vought the reins of OMB is an invitation to a policy battle at the expense of our Constitution. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to join my colleagues